Moving on to our next speaker, Tony Chow. Tony Chow studied architecture at the University of New South Wales, graduating with first-class honours. He's been in partnership with Stephanie Little since 1994 and is now co-director of Chow Little Architects with Stephanie, based in Sydney. Chow Little have been recognised for their high quality and inventive designs. They have created a body of work that manipulates space, takes advantage of site conditions, and manages to get through planning approval while totally avoiding cliche or convention. We'll ask you about that later, Tony. Chow Little have received numerous awards for their work, including the New South Wales Australian Institute of Architects Aaron Bolo Award for multiple housing and the Australian Institute of Architects National Robin Boyd Award. Architectural Record USA selected Chow Little amongst 10 international firms for their prestigious Design Vanguard issue in 2010, and they have been published multiple times in GA Houses from Japan. Chow Little were also the recipient of the Houses Magazine Australian House of the Year Award in 2016. Recent completed projects include the Coogee House and the incredible Darling Point apartment that appears to be simultaneously inspired by Miesian modernism and John Soane. Maybe we'll hear about these projects tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tony Chow.
Thank you, Stephen. Tonight, what I'll do is basically talk about 5 projects. Some of the projects are built and some of them are still under construction. The projects all differ considerably in scale, the type of client and the method of procurement. I would like to discuss how we work differently across each of these projects to achieve a singular architectural outcome. Our practice has developed a singular approach to architecture. Specific issues such as structure and construction, the client's brief, council's planning controls, site constraints and so on are not explored as individual entities within their own predetermined outcomes, but rather in relationship with each other within an overall framework. Singularity has enabled us to generate unified effects and expression specific to each of our projects. We try to achieve this through what we call a transversal approach. The history of architectural design process has generally unfolded with 2 design approaches, usually as binary opposites, the top-down or bottom-up approach. Bottom-up is an approach in which the smaller parts and elements, with a focus on their assembly, generates a greater whole. An example is Scarpa. Top-down is an approach in which an overall conceptual idea is conceived and everything is made to fit within that overall framework. The most extreme example is perhaps Peter Eisenman. There have been many discussions on the value of one approach over the other. At a recent talk between Jacques Herzog and Peter Eisenman, Eisenman commented that the text he uses to formulate a top-down approach outlives the building, and that the obsessiveness with materiality and intricate details is just absolutely childish. Herzog responded that Eisenman spends much too much energy and much too much time writing unnecessary books, and that if he stopped, his buildings would be much better. For us, the design process is not the matter of one over the other. We start with a bottom-up approach, analysing all the contingencies, and once we have a clear understanding of these, we then develop an overall strategy, a top-down approach, to mediate all the issues. The hope is that the overall strategy is dynamic and flexible enough to manage all the contingencies and to cope with change, especially during the design and procurement processes. To achieve singularity, top-down and bottom-up logics operate in a feedback loop. We constantly move back and forth between the two, fine-tuning the design from both ends. We call this the transversal approach. The question which we are now asking ourselves is, how do we maintain a singular approach and outcome at this critical stage of our practice, when we are now being offered a wider variety of work? Maintaining a singular approach requires painstaking commitment to detail and consistency, and we really need to focus on council planning controls, looking for loopholes to vary the typical suburban house. Physical model making, shop drawings, and detailing. Detailing is a very important process in our work, as it assembles the parts in such a way that it becomes seamlessly embedded into the whole. Details can change the way we interpret the building by helping generate effects. It can alter the inherent nature of a particular material by changing the way we perceive it. The painstaking commitment to this approach sometimes drives us a bit crazy, but it's all worthwhile for us in the pursuit of trying to do good work. The process also frustrates Jason, our accountant, as we sometimes never know when to stop. He reminds us that we are running a business and politely says, "Enough is enough, please, pens down, no more back and forth." So the first project I'd like to talk about is the Darling Point apartment. The apartment is designed for an elderly couple, empty nesters, downsizing after 40 years in a large family home to a small apartment, 1/5 of the floor space. The husband really wanted the change, but the wife was hesitant. In fact, the wife issued an ultimatum to her husband: "I'll live in it for 6 months, and if I don't like it, darling, I'm out." Downsizing is a relative term. Their previous house was a very large, very formal house. There was a room for everything: a breakfast room, a dressing room, a makeup room, a cloak room, all filled with lots and lots of stuff, and lots of art. In fact, early studies revealed that there wasn't enough wall space area to display their extensive art collection. As a result, the creative display and storage of artwork became a key driver for the design. We were inspired by Sir John Soane's own house, the greatest hoarder of them all, and his solution to displaying volumes of artwork much greater than their wall area as a sort of layered animated art cupboards. And borrowing from this idea, joiner units with recessed sliding doors and hinged panels offer up additional surfaces to create a fluid rather than a fixed art display, allowing the client a curatorial role in the display of their artwork. It also hides other things, such as the TV, and provides general storage. Joinery pieces are framed in thin white painted steel, appearing to float within the floor and ceiling planes. They also hide the air conditioning, allowing air intake at the bottom and for the air to spill out over the top, eliminating the need for bulkheads and grills. They also act as an unifying new ribbon wrapping around the perimeter of each of the spaces, creating a finely crafted peripheral condition. True to the strategy of the artwork display when entertaining, the kitchen can shut off to the living spaces and open for day-to-day use, enabling views from the kitchen to the water and flexibility in how the spaces can be compartmentalised. Corners were important to capture the faceting geometry. Here, an articulated open frame to display a Clement Meemore sculpture to the dining room. And in the dressing room corner, a bench seat so they can sit down to put their shoes on. The timber language is continued into the guest bedrooms and study areas. Our clients have a great sense of humour. They're entertained and like to surprise their guests. And with little encouragement, they were completely on board in commissioning artist Esther Stewart to paint a mural across the foyer walls, floors and ceilings. In a burst of geometric pattern and colour as a sort of mediator between public and private space. So, as soon as you exit the lift, it acts as a circuit breaker and a hint of the artwork to come inside. Even the lift door was included in the mural, which was an absolute nightmare with a body corporate. On a shorter side, when we commissioned Esther Stewart, she was a very young Australian artist, but was soon commissioned by Valentino to collaborate on his latest fashion collection. Our clients were rather chuffed by this and purchased 2 jumpers for themselves. Well, we thought we might be able to secure a few for the office, but at the price tag of $2,000 a pop, all we got was some bad photoshopping. Oops. The bathrooms, as a counterpoint to the geometry and singularity of the rest of the interior, are curvaceous forms, or curvaceous rooms, to provide an unexpected element of surprise. And are finished in an all-encompassing colours that give a nostalgic nod to the building's 70s architecture, here in a soft, dusty pink Korean and pale blue. The mirrored powder rooms was particularly important to the clients, as they liked to surprise their guests, and took great delight in their reactions, especially after a visit to the powder room following a few drinks. So after 4 years, I'm delighted to report that the husband and wife are both still living here. The next project is the Coogee House. New houses represent the core of our practice's work. The Coogee House is located on a spectacular site that overlooks Wedding Cake Island in Sydney. It is located on a corner block in an area known to council town planners as the Gaza Strip, due to the litigious nature of the residents. It is also adjacent to a set of public stairs known as the Coogee Stairs of Death, which is regularly used by athletes and screaming personal trainers. Our clients were 2 doctors, very analytical and measured personalities. They had studied and visited our previous work, and being risk averse, were interested in applying various elements from previous projects that they liked. Almost like a shopping list, they requested the following items: the express ceiling rafters from the Stewart House, the interstitial space from the semi-detached house, the precast concrete stair treads from the Skylight House, and the operable bifold shutters from the Freshwater House. Our challenge... So our challenge from that end was to avoid this house looking like an assemblage of disjointed elements. The skill will be in how we can reinterpret these elements within a new context to set up new relationships between them. Fortunately for us, the clients had lived on the site for over 10 years and therefore understood the site conditions very well. Specifically, there were 4 key issues for the client which determined the design approach. Firstly, the elevated corner block, the public interface with the stairs, and the slope of the site resulted in direct overlooking from many adjacent neighbours. Secondly, our clients had already established that they wanted a 3-storey house with living rooms on the top, bedrooms on the middle floor, and a basement space that was flexible. Council also stipulated that we had to maintain existing views of Wedding Cake Island from all 11 neighbours. And finally, even though the house was located 3 blocks away from the coastline, they wanted the top floor, and in particular the kitchen, to have uninterrupted views of the ocean and horizon line. They wanted to create the experience of being on an ocean liner, feeling on the water rather than set back from it. I think this is what I had in mind. The critical top-down approach, or the decision, was to introduce a veil screen as a strategy to mediate views and privacy. By planning an interstitial space zone around the edge of the building, highlighted in blue, gave us a buffer zone to resolve overlooking, as well as the flexibility to deal with the internal planning changes which would occur during the design process. Knowing how crucial the vial was to the success of the project, we tested a number of iterations. Testing roof forms, the shape of the openings, as well as the layering effects, so that the structural bracing and the external stairs can be read as a silhouette behind, creating a depth to the elevation. At different light levels and angles, the vial takes on a different appearance. The overall form of the building becomes scaleless, with the position of the three levels not immediately obvious. The vial not only has an utilitarian function to it, but is also ornamental, generating different effects from different angles. Reusing the bifolding system from the freshwater house at the ends of the house takes on a singular expression, with variation in depth governed by how the occupants control view, privacy, and sunlight. The form of the house was also influenced by how we can fit three stories within a two-story wall height control. If the section continued through to the elevation as an extrusion, a breach of this amount would occur. By folding down the roof at the ridge within the interstitial space to reduce the wall height, and cutting up the corners of the screen, we were able to reduce the breach to a level that council was willing to accept. The bottom edge follows the topography of the site and has a loose fit with the profile of the external stairs. This creates a more fluid, abstract plane appearing to fold down the site. To address view loss, council required us to cut off the eastern corners to open up view corridors to Wedding Cake Island. Requests from councils are often frustrating, but in this case, they made the architecture more interesting. We continue display for the bridge entry, resulting in a slimmer, more animated plan form. At the entry point, express roof purlins lead your eye to the living spaces and the ocean beyond. We realised by adapting the purlins from the Stuart House and reapplying them into a new set of conditions, they took on a different dimension. Here, the purlins would expand and contract to register display in plan and tilt up and down from the ridge, and drawing the view out to the horizon line. Uninterrupted ocean views are also available deeper in the open plan kitchen. The kitchen cabinetry floats to give the space a sense of lightness and is elevated just enough for the owner's dog to walk under, which makes Percy the #1 fan of the house. The language, materiality, and rhythm of the exterior continues through to the interior with repetitive elements such as the purlins, boarding, and balustrades. Each element builds on each other. The concrete ceiling and precast concrete stair treads provide mass as a counterpoint to the lightness of the repetitive elements that occur throughout the house. Conceptually, the Coogee House isn't a job where we pushed or developed new concepts, but rather took on existing ideas from our previous projects and reapplied them in a different set of conditions to generate new relationships and effects. The next project I would like to present is the Waterloo Apartments. The apartments are located in Green Square, situated in between the CBD and the airport. Green Square is currently undergoing one of the largest urban renewal transformations in Sydney to provide over 30,000 new apartments by 2030. The project is our first apartment building, and if it wasn't for the City of Sydney's competitive design policy, we would not have been given an opportunity to work at this scale. It was also Council's insistence that this particular site be earmarked for a small and/or emerging practice. This is a good example of how government policy can implement change within the profession, improve design standards, and provide a variety of buildings within the built environment. We were up against our colleagues and friends at Collins Turner and Tribe Studio, and we were fortunate enough to be chosen. The buildings is allocated at the intersection of two main roads and faces onto a proposed new park. A few key factors influenced our competition entry. Firstly, as part of this large urban renewal project, they had essentially wiped the slate clean. With little or no built context, we wanted to identify with the history of the place to avoid designing another generic apartment building. Secondly, we had to adjust our thinking to the change in scale, which was quite difficult. Architectural details that we had developed for our houses would be too unrelenting and lost at this scale. Thirdly, we had to comply with codes that affect the design, such as Council's DCP, as well as the state government's apartment design guide, which prescriptively sets out apartment sizes, minimum percentages for cross ventilation and solar access across the development, and so on. And finally, how to design a building in a culture of valued management, where the developer gradually strips all the architecture away, reducing the building to the lowest common denominator, so all that you are left with is just crumbs. In response, we started to delve deeper into the site's history, because with little or no context, you really need to grab onto anything you can latch onto. Looking at its geological past, the site was formerly a large wetlands known as the Waterloo Swamp. The name of the proposed adjacent park, Duralia Park, also picked up on this, as it is also the Aboriginal word for brolga, which is a wetlands bird. This sparked our curiosity, and we started researching traditional silt structures in wetland areas. By adapting the domino model from Le Corbusier, we tilted the columns along the periphery reminiscent of wetland structures. Visually, it created an interesting waist-like form that tapered into the centre of the building. The form and the expression of the building would be derived from the structure. The concept wasn't about skins, cladding, or finishes, which the developer can gradually take away. Because of this, we reduced the architectural idea to a single concept that couldn't be removed. With the structural frame itself as the main decorative motif for the building. The ground floor plan focuses on permeability, providing a public link through the centre of the building, activating all four sides of the ground plane. The two typical apartment plans focused on wraparound veranda-type balconies, ensuring that each apartment had dual frontages and naturally ventilated lobbies with views to the park. The plans are symmetrical, making it easy for us to document and faster and cheaper for the builder to build. Community spaces are located on the top floor, shaded by a large pergola structure. Following the competition win, we had to relook at the structure to rationalise it. The developer and structural engineer were particularly concerned with the columns splaying in both the horizontal and vertical axes. We built a series of models to test and fine-tune the columns, tilting only on the vertical plane. We had a brief window following the frantic rush of the competition to really focus on getting the structure right. It was a worthwhile process, as the final solution resulted in a cleaner and clearer and more direct expression of the idea. The process also presented an opportunity to basically rework the balustrades by introducing horizontal concrete elements that gradually diminish in height as the building goes up, affording more privacy to the lower levels and increasing views from the upper levels. Once the project went on site, nothing could prepare us for what was to come. Things moved so quickly on site that it was difficult to keep up to speed with the progress on site. And because of the design excellence competition setup, it was essentially an arranged marriage. Our company's aims were polar opposites. There were an endless negotiation of items, and as the developer was also the builder, it made things really, really difficult, as often they would just proceed to build something without our knowledge. One pattern of behaviour kept emerging through the negotiations. They would always defer decision-making to the company owner, but we never got the chance to meet him. Without meeting the owner to make an argument or to pitch directly to him was a very clever tactic by them. He became a convenient scapegoat, and for them to say no to us or to constantly change their mind. The first test was the concrete columns and the first floor awning. The concreter started using old formwork and refused to remove the fillet at the formwork corners to the columns, as it would take more time to precisely join the boards and therefore cost more money. We stood our ground, and as we knew we only had to get one element built well, that is the concrete structure. And after a few heated moments, we negotiated new form boards. Realising how passionate we were, the concreter, to his credit, devised a rigid mould for the columns and built a prototype, demonstrating that the fillet pieces were no longer necessary. We finally got the sharp corners to the columns that we wanted. It was important that we stood our ground at the beginning, as it set the tone for the rest of the project, and it's amazing how much leverage council conditions of approval, requiring the architect to sign off on design excellence before occupation, has during the construction process. The saving grace for us is that we had a great site foreman, Vu. He was our point of contact and a great mediator. He understood the value of our design and also the need to build quickly and cost effectively for his boss. When things got tough and disagreements couldn't be resolved on site, we reconvened to the local Chinese restaurant. When things got really, really desperate and we needed to get our point across, we resorted to desperate measures to convey our wishes. We also knew we had to detail the concrete elements in a basic and straightforward manner with lots and lots of tolerance. It was also quicker to hand-draw the details as they were building at such a fast pace. We especially focused on the corner details. Precast slab edges are mitered at the corners, and the precast handrails met at open right angles. The biggest problem we found wasn't the quality of the subcontractors, but the fact that the builders were building so quickly, subcontractors weren't properly briefed. We realised that it wasn't just about producing watertight documentation, but it was also actually more important going on site to speak directly to the contractors if we wanted something built well. For example, we spent a lot of time on site with the tiler to set out the foyer lobby tiling to ensure that there were no cut tiles. We won't pay for our time, but these were the extra things we had to do to ensure that we were happy with the construction. And Jason, well, he's not a happy camper again. The Waterloo apartments are an example of how we had to adjust our strategy. In our houses, we have to focus on many items to try to get them right. Here, we deliberately needed to focus only on one element, the structure, and to get that built well. At the same time as the Waterloo apartments, we were asked to design Brexit Whitney's Rosebery office, a change of scale from 4,000 square metres and 8 stories to a small tenancy fit out of only 230 square metres. We have a long-standing collaboration with Brexit Whitney. Rosebery is in fact the 4th office that we have completed for them. After working on their first office in Darlinghurst, it was clear that Shannon, the CEO of Brexit Whitney, was interested in fresh architectural concepts. As the company had expanded out to the inner city with satellite offices, it was important that no two offices were the same. And going on to our 4th office, it was challenging to keep delivering new ideas and surprising the client. The Rosebery office is located in the Cannery precinct. The brief called for 3 meeting rooms and a workspace of 25 staff. The budget allocated to the project was tight, significantly less than the previous offices, and they needed to be finished within 3 months. So our design response needed to be cheap and fast. The precinct is unique as it occupied an entire street block of reused industrial warehouses. The profile of tenants had revitalised Rosebery, becoming the hub for the area. Our tenancy is located in a small warehouse. There was a through site link which made the rear access equally as important as the street frontage. Our street frontage is generally unremarkable, as is the rear. However, inside we had a wonderfully proportioned space to work on with heritage listed trusses. The grid established by the truss had a strong presence. However, in contrast to the grid, the location of the front and rear entrances created a diagonal circulation link. 2 entrances presents its own problem. For example, where do you place the reception desk? Do you have 2 reception desks? And for an office of 25 people, that wasn't realistic. The design also needed to respond to the unique character that is Chow's Toomer, the director of the new office. Charles is full of beans, very much a caricature of a stereotypical real estate agent. His brief to us was more vague. He wanted the office to feel collaborative, and to quote Charlie, to feel the energy. Our first response was to position the reception at the centre point of the floor plan as a fulcrum, and to introduce circular working and meeting pods as a counterpoint to the functionalist warehouse grid. The position and scale of the new geometry funnels circulation from the entry points to the reception desk. As a solution to budget and time constraints, we proposed wrapping the perimeter of the pods in curtains as a primary spatial device, thinking more of an installational stage set design strategy, rather than building solid walls and partitions used in our previous 3 offices. The work desk configuration follows a circular geometry and provides a heightened level of collaboration. It also caters for the different internal team sizes. And in the final plan form, the work desk configuration has openings, allowing internal circulation links between the 3 pods. Waiting areas with bench seats are positioned to activate both the front and rear entrances. The axonometric shows how the circular pods start to compress and expand at various points, reinforcing the diagonal link between the front and rear entries. Vintage turn-of-the-century colours such as olive green, indigo blue and pastel pink were selected to reflect the building's heritage and denote each pod's function. Upon entry, the curtains at a fully closed position create defined independent pods, but as they are paired back, they reveal the full depth of the interior right through to the rear. The endless configuration of the curtain positions and the rich layering of colours create an always ever-changing interior experience. The S-fold curtains provide a level of opulence and surprise to the office interior and are paired back seamlessly with low-tech materials such as birch plywood and industrial paint. We custom designed the majority of the furniture to continue the birch plywood. And when we couldn't, we picked appropriate furniture to suit. Here, the Artec chair in the same plywood. And here, pink armchairs, colour matched to the curtains. Floor finishes, curtain tracks and joinery supports are also match the associated curtain colours to create a monochromatic colour palette, appearing as rooms within a room. The use of the geometry and colour creates singularity to each pod with variation in texture. The velvet curtains also provide acoustic insulation to the meeting rooms in lieu of solid partitions. And pink hydrangeas are the only flowers of choice here. Addressing the rear, the roller doors is replaced by a new window and bench seat. The success of the project, like all things, rests in details. To try to create that singular experience, this involves endless detailing and sketching. Sample boards and hand models. Pascal, our builder, played a huge part in the whole process. He was pedantic, and being his first flagship project, really put in a big effort. And with this working combination, we were able to create some really nice details here. All these details culminate in an elemental direct architecture that is curatorial, flexible, and dynamic in both its mode and appearance, creating the maximum effect with an economy of moves. The final project I'd like to present is the Glebe House, which is nearing completion. Fortunately, following the success of the Darling Point apartment, we got the opportunity to work on the daughter's new house in Glebe. We met the clients for the first time in our office, and they coincidentally saw the model for our R7 project and said, "Wow, I really love this. Can we do something like this for my house?" R7 was an invited competition entry for a mixed-use building in Barangaroo for land lease. Competitions are a very intensive process requiring a lot of energy and effort from our staff. There are a lot of late nights and bad takeaway meals. So when you're unsuccessful, it can be rather depressing. Our competition team would normally require 3 full-time staff, and for a small office of 8, it's a huge drain on our resources. Competitions run between 4 to 6 weeks. We realised that this just wasn't financially sustainable for an office of our size to do too many competitions in 1 year. And Jason gets on my back again, so we are now more discerning about the competitions that we accept. On a positive note, we sometimes explore concepts in competitions that we don't normally explore from our day-to-day projects. And we were particularly fortunate that the client gave us another opportunity to explore the R7 concept again. Similar to the R7 project, we positioned the openings to take advantage of the views to the city, trees, and to maximise natural light into the house. Privacy views and natural light are a major factor when designing in the inner city areas, so we had to carefully balance these factors. Spatially, it's a complex house, and luckily the client was similar to her parents, very much part of the art world, and wasn't scared off with such complex play of geometries. She not only embraced the concept, but even pushed us further to develop it. So, unlike the R7, where the openings were only explored in elevation, here we would continue the cutouts in plan, creating double height voids to maximise natural light to the ground floor living spaces. Together with the spiral staircase and circular skylights, the house became a three-dimensional exploration of internal space and light. Physical models were used to fine-tune the design and was a very reliable tool to communicate the complex spaces to the client. For a project of this complexity, collaboration between the builder and the subcontractors was very important, and in particular, the window fabricators. We worked with the window fabricator to develop details and installational techniques. If it wasn't for recent developments in engineered timber, it would have been very difficult to build and detail what we wanted. It would also be cost prohibitive if it wasn't for the CNC machinery and the advancement in fabrication techniques which have occurred in the last 10 years. The windows were fabricated into 2 sections in the factory and assembled on site. Corner details were also very important, especially for the large double height corner windows that focused onto the trees. Perimeter walls are internally lined in timber weatherboard, replicating traditional workers' cottages of the area, and work in tandem with the vertical window mullions. We're just a few months off from finishing the building, and we are particularly excited about this project being completed. Hopefully, the 5 projects presented tonight gives you some insights into how we work in the office. Thank you.